Before writing, let me check the names to avoid and read the front-end design skill for reference on tone. Actually, this is a pure writing task. Let me just verify the forbidden names and write. The forbidden names from the file are Gerald, Danny, Renee, Cooper, Victor Caldwell, Marcus, Patricia, Walter, Leanne, Francis, Diane, Nadine, Carol, Stewart, June, Trent, Beverly, Howard, Kyle, Sylvia, Doug, Dawn, Nathan, Terry, Maya, Stanley, Rosie, Elliot, Amber, Carolyn, Brett, Emma, Harold, Brett, Emma, Harold, Lawrence, Craig, Roger, Owen, Isabel, Mitch, Arthur Beale, Nora, Dale, Wesley, Leonard, Renata, Claire, Edmund Harlow, Garrett, Sandra, Whitfield, Ryan, Christine, Conrad, Kevin, Paulette, Franklin, Warren, Philip, Brenda, Sophie, Hank Mercer, Derek, Vanessa, Lily, Mel, Theo, Boyd, Richard Holloway, Oliver, Melissa, Catherine. Now I'll write a 5,000-word original story with all new names. Before I start writing, let me subscribe to one thing. The user said Nan under Gi Chu Them. This seems like an incomplete note. I'll proceed with what's clear and write the story. I'll use new names. Walter is taken. Let me pick carefully. I'll use Norman, narrator, 63, son Caleb, daughter-in-law Serena, Norman's wife Ruth, Serena's mother Gloria, lawyer, Mr. Hutchins, Detective Agent Pruitt, friend Lou. My name is Norman Hale. And I turned 63 the same autumn my son brought Serena home for the first time. I remember standing at the kitchen window, watching them walk up the driveway together. My son, Caleb, had his hand on the small of her back. The way a young man does when he's already decided, already certain, already gone. I didn't know that yet. I was just a father watching his boy come home. She wore a cream-colored blouse and carried a bottle of wine she'd clearly just bought, because the paper bag from the liquor store 2 blocks over was still creasing at the sides. Small detail. But I've spent 40 years in insurance fraud investigation. Small details are the only details that matter. Dad, Caleb said, this is Serena. She smiled. Wide, practiced. The kind of smile you put on before you walk into a room, not after you've settled into it. Mr. Hale, she said, Caleb talks about you constantly. I feel like I already know you. Is that right? I said. My wife Ruth came in from the garden with dirt on her knees and hugged Serena like she'd known her for years. Ruth always did that. She collected people. It was one of the things I loved most about her, and the thing that scared me most that evening. Dinner was pleasant. Serena was funny, attentive. Asked Ruth about the garden and me about my career. She had a talent for asking questions that sounded like genuine interest, but revealed nothing about herself. By the end of the evening, I knew her favorite color, her college major, and the name of her childhood dog. I did not know where she'd worked for the last 3 years, why she'd moved 4 times in 2 years, or why she paid for her portion of the check in cash when Caleb suggested we split it. Cash. At a sit-down restaurant. In 2025. I didn't say anything. I poured myself another glass of wine and watched my son look at her the way men look at something they're terrified of losing. They got engaged 14 months later. Spring. Caleb called me on a Tuesday morning, voice cracking a little, the way it hadn't since he was 16, and wrecked my truck backing out of the garage. Dad? I asked her. She said yes. I'm glad, son, I said, and I meant it. I did. Whatever I sensed about Serena, I had no proof of anything. Intuition isn't evidence. I know that better than anyone. The engagement party was at our house, Ruth's idea, and about 40 people came through on a Saturday afternoon in April. Serena's mother, Gloria, arrived late and left early. She was a tall woman, with expensive shoes and a handshake like a dead fish. She kissed Serena's cheek, chatted with Caleb for exactly 6 minutes. I counted, and then stood near the dessert table for the remainder of her visit, eating petit fours and watching the room like she was pricing furniture. At one point, I found myself beside her near the back porch. Beautiful home, she said. Thank you. Caleb tells me you're retired. Insurance, was it? Fraud investigation, I said. Retired 2 years ago. She looked at me for a moment. just a half-second longer than comfortable, and then smiled. Fascinating work, I'm sure. She left 40 minutes after that. Caleb walked her out. When he came back inside, there was something in his face. Not worry exactly, more like the look of a man who's been told to carry something heavy and is trying to decide if he can manage it. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, he said. Fine. He said it the way people say fine when they mean the opposite of fine. The wedding planning started in June, and by August things had moved from expensive to something I didn't have a word for yet. Serena's vision, as she described it over a Sunday dinner at our house, involved a venue in Connecticut she'd seen in a magazine. A guest list of 300 people, a dress from a designer whose name I didn't recognize but Ruth did, based on the small sounds she made when Serena mentioned it, and a budget she presented not as an estimate, but as a figure. We're looking at $1.4 million, Serena said. She said it the way you'd say, we're looking at a 2-bedroom in a good school district. Matter of fact, already decided. Ruth set down her fork. I took a sip of water. Caleb stared at his plate. That's quite a number, I said. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, Serena said. You only do it right once. And your family's contribution? I asked. A flicker. Just a flicker across her face, so fast that Ruth would have missed it. I didn't. My mother is in a difficult position financially right now, she said, but she'll contribute what she can. What does that mean in concrete terms? Caleb looked up at me then. There was something in his eyes, not irritation, not the look of a son telling his father to back off. It was something else. Something that looked almost like relief that I'd asked. We haven't worked out all the details, Serena said smoothly. Of course, I said. No rush. But there was something in my chest that had gone very still and very quiet, the same way it used to go when I was sitting across a desk from someone who was lying to me and hadn't realized I already knew it. I didn't start looking right away. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a man who spies on people without cause. I had a feeling, nothing more, and feelings don't entitle you to invade someone's privacy. What changed was a Wednesday in September. Caleb called me at 7 in the morning. He never calls before 9. He's been a late riser since he was 14, and I've made my peace with it. Dad, he said, are you home? I'm home. Can I come over? I don't want to talk on the phone. He was at my door in 20 minutes. Ruth was still upstairs. He sat down at the kitchen table, and I put coffee in front of him, and he wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't speak for almost a full minute. I need to tell you something, he finally said, and I need you to not react until I'm finished. All right. About 8 months ago we started. Serena told me her car needed emergency repairs. Said the estimate was $6,300 and she was between paychecks and could I help her out. I gave her the money. She said she'd pay me back in 2 weeks. He paused. She never brought it up again, and I didn't want to make it a thing, so I let it go. He looked at his coffee. Then, in February, there was a business opportunity. A friend of hers was opening a boutique. Needed investors. Serena said it was a sure thing, that she'd already put in $5,000 of her own money, and that if I could put in $12,000, we'd both see returns in 90 days. He stopped. I never met the friend. I never saw a business plan. The boutique doesn't exist, I checked. I kept my face still. There was a medical thing in the spring. A procedure she said she needed, said her insurance wouldn't cover it, said she was embarrassed to ask, but didn't have anyone else. $9,000. He looked at me. I took her to the follow-up appointment. The doctor's office had no record of any procedure. I set down my coffee cup. Caleb. I know. How much total? He pulled out his phone, opened a note he'd clearly been keeping for some time. His hand was steady, but his jaw wasn't. $6,300 for the car, $12,000 for the boutique, $9,000 for the medical, $4,000 for what she called deposit protection on an apartment for her cousin, $3,800 for a flight emergency. Her words, when her supposed father was ill. He put the phone down. $38,100. Over 8 months. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere down the street. Ordinary Tuesday morning sound, the world going about its business. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I asked. My voice was level. I made sure of it. "Because I was ashamed," he said. "Because I thought I was in love with her. Because I kept telling myself there was an explanation." He looked at the table. "Because every time I almost brought it up, she'd do something that made me feel like the problem was me for even thinking it." I recognized that. The architecture of it. I'd seen it in my professional life more times than I could count. It has a name. It's called being very, very good at what you do. "Is there more?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "She's been calling my grandmother." I went still. "What do you mean, calling your grandmother?" "Graham has been calling me," he said. "Twice, 3 times a week for the last month. Asking about Serena, saying how much she likes her. How she'd like to help the young couple get started." He finally looked up at me directly. "Dad, Graham's account at First Regional. She mentioned to me that she'd made a little gift to help with the wedding. I haven't been able to get a straight answer about the amount. My mother is 81 years old. She lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in a retirement community in Darien. She is sharp as a tack about most things, but she has always, her entire life, been profoundly susceptible to people who are warm to her, who call regularly, who ask after her garden and remember the name of her late husband. His name was Bernard. He died 9 years ago. I still miss him every day." "Caleb," I said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." He looked at me. "I need you to go home. I need you to act exactly as you normally would. Take Serena to dinner if that's what you'd normally do. Talk about the wedding. Do not change anything. Can you do that?" "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find out exactly who she is," I said, "and then we're going to deal with it properly. Not out of anger. Not in the middle of a confrontation. Properly." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Before he left, he hugged me. He hadn't done that spontaneously since he was about 12. I held on for a second longer than I normally would. "It's going to be okay," I said. "I promise. I don't make promises I'm not certain I can keep. It's a rule I've had for 30 years. I broke it that morning because some things matter more than rules. I spent the next 3 weeks doing what I'd spent a career doing, except this time it was personal, in a way that professional work never quite is, and I had to remind myself regularly to be thorough rather than fast. I have a friend named Lou who spent 22 years as a private investigator before his knees gave out and he moved to Florida. He still works selectively, from his kitchen table with a laptop and a network of contacts that would surprise most people. I called him the morning after Caleb came to see me. "I need a full workup," I said. "Background, financials, prior addresses, any court records, civil or criminal." "Who's the subject?" "My son's fiancée." A pause. "How bad is it?" "I don't know yet," I said. "That's what I need you to find out." Lou called me back in 11 days. What he found was not a surprise. What it was extensive. Serena had been engaged before. Twice. Both engagements had ended within 18 months. Both times after the fiancé had reported significant financial losses. In one case, nearly $60,000. In another case, a man who'd co-signed a personal loan she'd never repaid. There were no criminal charges filed in either case. In both cases, the men had been too embarrassed or too heartbroken, or simply too exhausted to go through it. There were 2 civil suits. One had been settled quietly. The other was still technically open in a county court in Ohio. Her mother, Gloria, was not in a difficult financial position. She owned a 4-bedroom home outright, drove a late-model Mercedes, and had filed tax returns showing comfortable income for the last 6 years. The story about Gloria's hardship, the reason Serena's family couldn't contribute to the wedding, was not true. And my mother's account at First Regional showed 2 outgoing wire transfers in the past 6 weeks, totaling $22,000. The recipient account had Serena's name on it. My mother had no idea. She thought she was helping her grandson's fiancé handle some wedding vendor deposits. Serena had told her the vendors required early payment. She'd brought my mother printed invoices. I had Lou pull the vendor names. 3 of them didn't exist. I read through all of it twice. Then I folded the papers and put them in the top drawer of my desk, the one that locks. And I sat very still for a while. I did not feel angry exactly. What I felt was the thing that comes after anger, when you've processed it and moved through it and come out the other side into something quieter and more purposeful. I've felt it before. It's not a comfortable feeling, but it's a useful one. I made 3 phone calls, one to my attorney, a man named Mr. Hutchins, who I had known for 20 years, one to a contact at the county district attorney's office, someone I'd worked with on 2 separate fraud cases a decade ago, and one to Caleb. I have everything, I told him. I need you to set up a family dinner. Sunday, your grandmother, your mother, you, Serena. Our house. And then what? Caleb asked. And then we handle it. The Sunday she walked in, Serena was wearing a dark green dress and carrying a pie she'd bought, not made. I could see the bakery sticker on the bottom of the box. She kissed Ruth on the cheek, hugged my mother with what looked like genuine warmth, complimented the house as though she hadn't been in it 30 times. My mother, Eleanor, sat at the head of the table in the spot she's occupied at our family dinners for 40 years. She is a small woman, white-haired, with the kind of posture that comes from a generation that was taught to sit up straight and eyes that are still very dark and very alert. She patted Serena's hand and called her dear, and asked whether she'd decided on flowers for the reception. Serena said she was leaning toward white peonies. We ate dinner. Ruth made pot roast. The conversation moved through the usual channels. The garden, a movie Ruth and I had seen, something Caleb was working on at his firm. Serena participated easily, fluently, in the way of someone who is very comfortable in social situations and has learned that the best way to appear trustworthy is to seem relaxed. I watched her. After dinner, Ruth brought out coffee, and that was when I put the folder on the table. It wasn't a large folder, just a manila envelope, the standard kind, with a small stack of papers inside. I set it down quietly, between my coffee cup and the salt shaker, and I left my hand resting on top of it. Serena glanced at it. Just a glance. Then she looked away. I'd like to talk about something, I said, as a family. The room adjusted. Ruth looked at me. Caleb looked at his hands. My mother set down her coffee. Serena, I said, I spent the last 3 weeks putting together some information. I want to go through it with you because I think it's important that everyone at this table understands what's been happening. She looked at me directly. I'll give her credit for that. She didn't look at Caleb, didn't look for an exit. She looked straight at me. Of course, she said. Her voice was steady. I opened the folder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't editorialize. I laid out each item the way I'd laid out 1,000 items in my career. Dates, amounts, documentation, source. The car repair that no mechanic had any record of, the boutique investment that corresponded to no registered business, the medical procedure with no hospital record, the wire transfers from my mother's account to a personal account in Serena's name, accompanied by invoices for vendors that did not exist. I put the papers down one at a time. The room was very quiet. My mother had gone very still. She is not a woman who cries easily. She was not crying. She was looking at Serena with an expression I recognized from my own face sometimes, the expression of someone absorbing a fact they wish were not true. Caleb stared at the table. Ruth had her hands folded in her lap. The total, I said, across what Caleb can document and what I've traced through my mother's accounts is approximately $60,000. That doesn't include whatever arrangements you had pending for the wedding budget. I folded my hands. I've already spoken with my attorney and with the district attorney's office. There are 2 prior civil cases on record involving almost identical patterns. I'm prepared to share all of this documentation with law enforcement and Mr. Civilbao. Hutchins has advised me that the elements here, wire fraud, elder financial abuse, are serious charges. The silence lasted a long time. Then Serena said, very quietly, I can explain. I imagine you can, I said. You're quite good at explaining things. I've noticed that. I paused, but I'd suggest that the explaining happen with an attorney present, because anything you say to me now, I intend to pass along in full. She looked at Caleb. For the first time all evening, the composure slipped. Just slightly. Just enough. Caleb looked back at her and then looked away. She understood what that meant. I watched her understand it. She left within the hour. She didn't take the pie box. What came after was not simple or clean, because these things never are. There were lawyers on both sides. There were several weeks of what my attorney called negotiation, and what I called watching someone calculate how much they could still extract from a situation. In the end, full restitution was agreed to, every dollar to Caleb, every dollar to my mother, in exchange for a deferred prosecution agreement that included conditions I won't detail here, but that my contact at the DA's office described as appropriately serious. Gloria, her mother, was not charged with anything. There wasn't evidence she'd known the specific details, but she knew enough. I believe that. I have no proof, and I said nothing, and some things you simply have to live with not being able to fix. My mother called me 2 weeks after it was over. She'd been quiet during that stretch, more quiet than usual, and I'd been letting her have the space she seemed to need. I should have known, she said. Mom, I'm 81 years old, Norman. I have been around long enough to know better. She's very good at what she does, I said. She's fooled people, younger and sharper than either of us. A long pause. Your father would have seen through her, she said. Dad would have offered her a second helping of pot roast and asked her about her childhood, I said. That's not the same as seeing through her. She laughed, small and a little rough. That's true. We talked for another half hour. About Bernard. About Caleb, who was doing better. Slowly, haltingly better. The way you get better from something that was both a loss and a relief. About her garden and whether she'd plant dahlias again this year. Before she hung up, she said, Thank you for handling it the way you did. No yelling. No scene. You're welcome, I said. Your father would have made a scene, she said. And I could hear that she was smiling. He absolutely would have, I said. Caleb took about 4 months to really come back to himself. That's the part nobody tells you about. Not the confrontation. Not the legal resolution. But the long quiet afterward, when someone you love turns out to have been mostly invented. He'd grieve for Serena sometimes. Not the person she was, but the person he'd believed she was. Those are two different losses, and they don't arrive on the same schedule. I didn't push him to talk about it. I called on Sundays. I invited him for dinner without pressure. I let him set the pace. One evening in January he came over, and we sat in the living room after Ruth had gone to bed, and he said, How did you know? That first night. You knew something was off. The cash, I said. At the restaurant. He frowned. That's it. That was enough to look. Everything else I found by looking. He was quiet for a while. I feel stupid, he said. You're not stupid, I said. You were in love. That's not stupidity, Caleb. That's just being human. You didn't fall for it. I wasn't in love with her, I said. That's the whole difference right there. It's not that I'm smarter than you. It's that I was watching from a different angle. He thought about that. Also, I said, 30 years of fraud investigation helps. He laughed. First real laugh I'd heard from him in months. We watched the end of a game he'd turned on, and then he stayed for a late dinner, and Ruth made eggs because it was 10 o'clock and none of us had eaten properly. We sat at the kitchen table and talked about nothing in particular. A trip Ruth wanted to plan, a book I was reading, a project Caleb was excited about at work for the first time in a long while. I thought about what my mother had said. No yelling, no scene. I am not a dramatic man. I was raised by people who believed that the most important things you do quietly. You don't announce them. You don't perform them. You just do what needs to be done, and then you sit down and have eggs with your family at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. That's not a lesson I could have taught Caleb directly. Some lessons only arrive through living. I'm 63 years old. I've worked for 40 years at something that required me to look at people carefully and assume nothing and document everything. I've made mistakes along the way. Everyone who investigates things for a living has walked away from something they should have caught. I am not perfect, and I know it. But I know this. The most dangerous thing you can be is the person no one is watching. And the most important thing a father can be is the person who is watching, quietly, without drama, ready to act the moment his son needs him to. Serena believed she was in a room full of people who weren't paying attention. She was wrong about one of them. That's all it takes. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this ended. Not in any grand or spiritual sense. I'm a practical man, always have been. But in the simple, mechanical way that a life in fraud investigation teaches you to think. Every outcome has a chain behind it. Pull the right thread, and the whole thing unravels. Serena made a calculation when she met our family. She looked at Caleb and saw someone earnest and trusting. She looked at Ruth and saw warmth she could use. She looked at my mother Eleanor and saw an 81-year-old woman who wanted to feel connected to her grandson's future. And she looked at me and decided I was just a retired man with a soft life and no reason to look closely at anything. That last part was her mistake, and it was a consequential one. What I keep coming back to is this. The people who do what Serena did aren't unusually clever. They're unusually patient, and they rely on one thing above everything else. The assumption that the people around them have stopped paying attention, that the father at the dinner table is just making polite conversation, that the grandmother writing the check is too old to ask hard questions, that the son in love is too far gone to see clearly. They're not wrong most of the time. Most of the time, nobody's watching. I was watching. I'd been watching my whole career. The difference this time was that it was my family on the line, and that changes something in you. Not your method, but your resolve. I didn't move faster or angrier than I would have in a professional context. I moved exactly the same way, with the same patience, the same documentation, the same deliberate quiet. But there was something underneath it, some bedrock of purpose, that made me certain I would not stop until I had everything I needed. That's the thing about integrity. Real integrity, not the performed kind. It doesn't show up loudest in the big dramatic moments. It shows up in the 11 days I waited for Lou to call me back. It shows up in the Tuesday morning when Caleb sat at my kitchen table and I kept my face still and my voice level while my insides were doing something else entirely. It shows up in the Sunday dinner where I didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't make a scene. Just placed a folder on the table and let the truth do what truth does when it's documented properly. Caleb asked me once, months later, whether I felt bad for her at all, whether any part of me understood how someone ends up living the way Serena lived. I told him honestly that I didn't feel bad for her. I felt something more complicated, a kind of tired recognition. People who operate the way she did have usually convinced themselves that the people they're taking from can afford it, or deserve it, or won't really suffer. It's the story you tell yourself so you can keep going. The problem is that the story has consequences, and consequences don't care what story you're telling yourself. She targeted my mother because she thought Eleanor was old and trusting and safe. What she didn't account for was that Eleanor raised me, and I was neither old enough to be complacent nor trusting enough to look away. Every action builds something. Not a karma ledger, not a cosmic score. Just a record, a chain of choices that either earns you people who will stand up for you, or doesn't. Caleb had spent his whole life being the kind of son worth standing up for. My mother had spent her whole life being the kind of woman worth protecting. I had spent 40 years building the skills to actually do it when it mattered. None of that was an accident. And none of what happened to Serena